All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 44 of the MVRed Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Metzinger. Joining me is Dane Davis, and two over from me on the screen here is the Mahoning Valley's newest state representative, Tex Fischer, of the 58th district right now, right, Tex?
Yes, 58 now, running in 59 in November. Yeah, very confusing.
Yeah, I was going to say very confusing. So we're thrilled to have Tex with us this evening because obviously he's new. What was it? Early August, I think.
Appointed
Or
June
July.
26th. Yeah,
Oh, June. I was a little off there.
about
So
10:30
late
at night.
June.
Yeah, very late on the agenda. Last day before summer and election recess. So
I was
kind
going
of
to
got
say,
in there at the last minute. Yeah.
and we're going to get into that because the timing is quite unique for somebody to get sworn in and then obviously go right into recess like that. So we'll get into that. So we'll get to learn a little bit about Tex throughout this evening and throughout the night. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. We'll be sure to promote this episode with voters across the district afterwards because we're really looking forward to having Tex on. And one of the beautiful things from my perspective, and I'm sure Dane you'll agree, is to see the continued development of young Republicans, especially in our area. Now we have Hugh, we had Al Catrona, we have Santucci up in Trumbull County, we had Loychek up there, we have Dave Thomas, who's going to be the next one up there in Trumbull County. So there's
Sarah Fowler up in
Mhm.
Ashtabula, not
That's
really
right.
Mahoning,
But still,
Steve Demetrio here in Geauga. Yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
young people.
Yeah.
so it's exciting for the party, exciting to see people in our generation taking charge for the Republican Party. So we'll get into that tonight. Again, we'll get to learn more about Tex, talk a little bit about the district, get to learn where he stands on certain issues, maybe what issues he really plans to champion for the district in Columbus. And then we'll talk about his race in November, because again, all of this kind of came about fairly quickly, I would say, for you compared to some others. So, Dane, before we get into asking Tex some questions, how are things going with you? And then we'll get firing away with Tex.
Well, you should put on that agenda the VP debate, which was last night. We gotta do some feedback, and maybe Tex can give his some opinions there. But first of all, yeah, I'd like to second what Michael said and thank you for our humble little podcast that we've been doing as kind of like this side project. And we've had we've had Bernie Moreno on. We've had some big names in the area.
Ryan Gerdusky,
Nick Santucci. I mean, we've had some good names. And I gotta say, Mr. Fischer, Tex, I don't know, however you want to go with it,
Tex, yeah.
or go by rather. I have seen you around, like floating around out there, and like if you're a fan of like the Mahoning or the Trumbull GOP pages and you follow their photos, you start to see the same cast of characters, and you can recognize people before you even know who they are, and you've got a very distinct look to yourself. You got the wavy hair, right? It's much fuller than my hair. You've got the glasses. I have a pair of glasses very similar that I'm holding up.
Oh yeah, those are very similar.
Nice as yours, but very cool. You got definitely a look, and you've been around, and now you're the state rep. So allow me to ask the question. Maybe I'll kick this off. Is like, who is Tex Fischer? Who's John Gall? Who's Tex Fischer? It's a cool name too, by the way.
Yeah. Thank you. It was caused me a little bit of a headache actually for a little while there, but ended up being probably the best thing that could have happened to me. Probably single-handedly responsible for like plus 15-20% general name ID for me. So I'm very grateful for that whole little stunt. So hats off to Mr. Anderson for handing me a great way to kick things off and get a lot of free press for something that even members of his own party that I talked to at the Canfield Fair basically apologized to me for that whole situation, but it worked out for the best. So I'm glad that's over with.
What situation?
You don't know about this thing?
No, Chris Anderson, the head of the Democratic Party.
Yes. So they tried to, I'll give you the kind of the backstory here. So I've been known as Tex since I was a kid. Just I'm not from Texas. I'm from Youngstown. I'm not, I don't even like country music, honestly. So as an adult, the name is kind of ironic, but I've just been known as Tex since I was a kid. Guy at church started calling me Tex, and I thought, I like that better.
Yeah.
So it just kind of caught on. And as I, became an adult and started my political career, everybody just knew me as Tex. And so I thought I had the bright idea. My given name was Austin,
Okay.
where the Tex probably came from. So I had the bright idea 4 or 5 years ago that, I should just add Tex as a middle name to make my life easier and not have to explain, Tex is just a nickname, put Austin down and all that. Just why not? So I did it. Didn't give it a second thought until a couple months ago. And lo and behold, after the party appointed me as Alcatrona's ballot replacement for the state rep race in the 59th district, the Mahoning County Democratic Party filed a challenge to my candidacy, citing a name change law from the 90s. I think it was originally from 1994, sometime in the mid 90s, that was used to disqualify a trans candidate earlier in the primary. Essentially, the law states that if you are circulating a petition, you have to disclose any former names within the 5 previous years on your petitions. Otherwise, you're disqualified. So there was I don't remember the county, but there was a trans candidate named Vanessa Joy who also failed to disclose in her case, her dead name, and ultimately was disqualified from the ballot for it. I vaguely remember the story when it circulated back in the primary. Didn't really think anything of it. And then lo and behold, because I did not disclose that I added a second middle name. I didn't change my first name. I added a second middle name, and didn't think anything really of it. I mentioned it, briefly at the board, like, is there anything I need to fill out because of that? And they're like, no. That only applies to petitions, which is, as the law is written, it applies to petitions. But they filed a challenge anyway, had to have a Board of Elections hearing. Of course, the vote was 2-2 along party lines. They kicked the decision to Secretary LaRose, who ultimately decided to certify me on the ballot about a month later. But that's kind of the gist of the situation. And in the process of that, I got a ton of interview opportunities. So it worked out fine. Just kind of a tactic to waste my time and campaign funds. And also, I do think, from what I've heard, they seemed pretty, initially, I think they thought that they got me and they were going to get me thrown off and essentially just have an unopposed Democrat on the ballot for the seat. And I wouldn't have been on the ballot, but ultimately they failed. But yeah, that was the kickoff to my candidacy, essentially. So.
Wow. Well, I'm sorry you had to go through that, but you won in the end, right? You're like,
I did. No, I'm good. I'm on the ballot. Yeah.
Yeah. How old are you, if I may ask?
28.
28. Okay. You look like you look young, but like you look mature
Mm-hmm.
at the same time. It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Michael and I how old are you, Michael? You're like a 65-year-old in the body of like a 30-year-old, right?
35 now, Dave.
Oh, man, time's flying by.
I'm getting up there.
Yeah.
Catching up to you.
How nice one. How that's not actually true. So that's but let me go back to my original question. What's your background? Where did you come from? You've obviously been involved with Republican politics for some time, but tell me the story from like birth to becoming a state rep in less than 5 minutes, if you could squeeze it in that long.
Okay. Yeah. We'll see what I can do there. So
Yeah.
I'll give you the 10,000 foot view. So I was born and raised in Youngstown, the city, the South Side, Brownlee Woods area. So basically lived there until I moved out. I was 19, 20 years old. Then I lived in Poland for a year, and then ultimately bought the house here in Boardman that I currently live in back in 2018. So I was very fortunate to buy a house at 21 before interest rates were insane, and worked out great. The property tax issue, which I'm sure we'll get into later, is hitting hard here in Boardman, as Michael would know if he's also living in Boardman. But that's, I've lived in the Valley my whole life. I've always used to make jokes to people because I've had a lot of friends. Obviously, I imagine all three of us have experienced friends and family members having to kind of move away, whether it's for college or after college, feeling like they need to move away to pursue opportunities or be able to live the life they want to live. They just don't really see the Mahoning Valley as having the ability for them to live the life that they want. So they have to go elsewhere to pursue that. That's always kind of, I want to say rubbed me the wrong way. It's just never something that I've really wanted to do. Always been, really like to think loyal to the area. I love it here. I've kind of, plan on, if you ever want to get me out of the Mahoning Valley, it's going to be in a casket is usually what I tell people. So
I'm right there with you, Tex.
Yeah, it's a great place to live, great people, great history, and I think a lot of potential for the future too. But that's also, I think a lot of what the state and local government does a lot of times gets in the way. Obviously we shoot ourselves in the foot sometimes, and I think there's still a lot of opportunity. We've got to get some things straightened out at the state level, at the local level, federal level. I mean, God bless us if we can get anything done there, but I'm going to do whatever I can at the state level to try and help. So been in the Valley my whole life. I was actually homeschooled. So my dad was formerly a teacher, homeschooled my sister and I was homeschooled, I think 2nd or 3rd grade through high school graduation. So I have a very non-traditional education background. I was homeschooled. I did not go to college. Kicked around the idea of going to study kind of like graphic and web design, ended up just teaching myself that sort of stuff. Got a few jobs in the political field, and those two eventually merged into the business that I've been running full time since 2021, which is a digital marketing company. We do a lot of political work, but we also work for public figures, nonprofits, really anything on the digital front, conservative, kind of the intersection of all those different issues. And I guess jumping back, I got too far ahead of myself there. So
no,
jumping back,
helpful.
yeah. So I finished up high school, got a job, actually managing a campaign for the 59th District State House race in 2014. Our candidate's name was Paul Mitchell. He was running against Ron Gerberry, if either of you remember that name, long time ago.
Yeah, I do.
And so that was a really fun experience. Paul was a great guy. We ran a really good campaign on almost no money. I think we maybe spent like 10 grand in total. We got about 47% of the vote in 2014 against Ron Gerberry, which a lot of people didn't see coming. Got a lot of like, oh, I had no idea that race was going to be close. We should have donated. It's like, well, thanks, but it doesn't do us any good now. So that's kind of when I realized that this is kind of the angle that I want to pursue career-wise. I just got so much enjoyment out of it. I felt like I had a lot of good ideas, and really felt that first campaign taught me a lot. Obviously, it was a great learning experience, but just made me realize and kind of opened my eyes that I thought that we're not going to be a Democratic stronghold forever. I mean, my first involvement was 2011, 2012 as a volunteer. I was an intern for the Victory office, the Romney RNC field office in Boardman, the old Republican headquarters on 224 next to Summitville Tile, which is now Kebab House. Great place. You ever in the mood for Mediterranean food or love Kebab House. So it's always cool walking in there and seeing, I used to have a desk in basically the dining room where we just take phone calls and make phone calls and cut paper walk books back in the day. So that was my first political involvement. Turned that into that job in 2014. And that's when I kind of started to see the beginnings of the realignment that we saw. A lot of door-to-door conversations with people that you ask them all these questions. They're not giving you left-wing answers. Like, these people are not progressive in really any sense of the word. But at the end, when you get to the bottom of the survey, you're like, who do you plan on voting for? It's Democrat all across the board. And it just kind of left you scratching your head and realizing these people aren't really Democrats. They're culturally Democrats, and they're Democrats because they've always been Democrats. But they're not actually, in any real sense, Democrats, given what that party's advocating for even 10 years ago, which is significantly less, I think, extreme than what they're advocating for now. And then, fast forward 2 years later, Donald Trump was the catalyst that kind of sparked this whole realignment that we have, which has brought us to where we are today, which is great. But after that 2014 campaign, I started working for Turning Point USA. I was in their first hiring class. So I ended up being a regional manager there for about 3 years, covered Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, New Jersey, a couple of other states here and there. So that was also a really good experience. Got a job with the state party in 2018 for the 2018 election cycle. So managed the seven or eight counties, basically from Ashtabula, Geauga, Portage, Mahoning, Trumbull, Columbiana, that whole region. Worked on a lot of the local campaigns there. Obviously, it was a really good year for us in Ohio, not nationally, but really good in Ohio. And so, in addition to working with the party as the field, the regional field director and managing the team of field organizers, really helped Don Manning and Mike Ruley a lot. I've known Mike Ruley for a number of years before that. Then when he ran, I tried to do everything I could to help him out. So kind of spent a lot of a lot of extra time outside of work trying to help those two get across the finish line. And ultimately they did. So that was a really rewarding experience. And then after that election was over, I got a job with the American Conservation Coalition as their national field director, which was a huge jump in responsibilities, kind of starting a field program from scratch, running an entire department, from building it from the ground up. I mean, there was nothing really to that. So the first couple of years were building the infrastructure, creating the programming, and then that kind of transitioned to building out the team of staff, and getting that, applying the programming that we'd come up with and putting that into the real world. So for those who aren't familiar, that organization does a lot of work in the energy and environmental space, but from a conservative perspective, talking about issues around clean energy, climate, conservation, but from a conservative perspective and understanding those issues should not be owned by the left. The left might be the ones that talks about them the most, but absolutely should not own those issues. And in fact, I think our voices are really needed to kind of tone some of those conversations down. There's a lot of crazy stuff that gets thrown around by the left on those topics. And I think getting more conservative voices into that conversation has actually been really successel, and they've been really successful the last few years as well. Ever since I, stepped aside from that to pursue my business full time, started that business as a side thing back in 2017. Worked on a few clients, helped with Ruling and Don Manning and some other local candidates. But we kind of picked up a lot of business, and then around 2020, 2021, my business partner and I were like, it's about time. If we want to do this, we should go all in. And we took a leap of faith and quit our comfortable nonprofit jobs and decided to go all in on self-employment, which very stressful first year. So we've had a lot of great success and everything's still going really well, but just making that big leap of faith from a very comfortable job with benefits to taking a big pay cut and being responsible for everything yourself. Also a great learning experience, probably the most valuable learning experience I've had to date, honestly. That gave me the opportunity to get even more involved in state house politics. We worked with a lot of candidates at the state level. Nick Santucci, for example, we worked with Loychek and Ruley, like I said, Don Manning, Al Catrona, a lot of folks across other parts of the state, Treasurer Sprague. So, we've had a lot of great success in that realm, but getting to work so closely with those state house candidates really reignited the passion I've always had for state policy. I think that's there's the state government has I think a lot more impact on our day-to-day lives than people realize, and honestly probably more of an impact on our day-to-day lives than the federal government does, just because we're dealing with education, infrastructure, public safety. A lot of those things are funded and governed at the state level, state and local level, but even a lot of stuff at the local level is funded through the state. So the state government touches people's lives, I think, in a way that a lot of people don't realize. And so I've really kind of gotten into the weeds and in deep on a lot of the state house level stuff the last few years. And this opportunity came along. Never had any interest in running for anything, like this, or really putting myself out there all that much. But this opportunity arose and got a lot of encouragement and gave it a lot of thought, honestly, a agonizing, probably 2 or 3 weeks of thought, and decided to give it a go, and worked out in my favor. I won our local screening committee vote. Then got appointed June 26th, about 10:30 p.m. Came up last agenda item before recess, and so that was a long day of sitting around, waiting around for something to happen, not even knowing if it was going to happen. And then, sure enough, at the end of the day, it did, and kind of been full speed ahead ever since, trying to get caught up, meeting as many people as I can, having as many conversations as I can, building relationships with other legislators that I didn't already know, trying to figure out areas of common interest, and just generally kind of getting the lay of the land and getting ready to go for both the election in November, but more importantly is the next General Assembly, which I think there's going to be a ton of potential for us to hopefully do some good and make some transformative changes to the state. But I've had so much fun doing this, and honestly, even the stuff that most people might not think is going to be all that fun or interesting, just constituent services, taking phone calls from numbers I don't recognize, and half the time it's a telemarketer, but the other half of the time it's somebody that's having an issue with the state, or it's somebody from, it's a township trustee that's having an issue with something, or a fire chief that just wants to kind of bend your ear and let them know about the challenges they're facing with the MARC system, or, Medicaid reimbursement, or whatever that is. Just having so much fun, kind of getting to know all these people and learning about these issues and trying to figure out ways to help. So it's been a very crazy 3 or 4 months. Not something, if you asked me 6 months ago, was not on my radar at all. I probably would have gotten a laugh out of the thought that I would be a elected, appointed official, whatever you want to call it, back then. So it's, that's kind of the 10,000-foot view. I think that probably was longer than 5 minutes, but open any questions or specific follow-ups there.
No, that's pretty comprehensive. One of the things I think I appreciate is the conservationism and conservatism. I think it's inherent that if you're a conservative, that you're conserving the natural environment to pass on to your children and your posterity. And I think, the Dems will talk about all these various environmental regulations and carbon emission, and then they turn around and let in like 20 to 30 million illegal immigrants. And they're paving over entire sections of the country to house these people that have no right to the land of America. And it's like, what are you doing? And then on a global level, I thought JD, I don't know if you saw the vice presidential debate, but he made a brilliant point that if you support environmentalism, you should support American manufacturing. China is an environmental nightmare. In India, their waters are full of pollution. You talk about the great plastic patch in the Pacific Ocean. That's not coming from the United States in straws. That's coming from these third world countries. So you should have as much manufacturing in the U.S. as possible. And it can be done, and we can have environmental policy and energy policy. It just needs to be balanced. But
I completely agree.
As an aside, my question, and then I'll stop and turn it over to Michael, is, that's kind of your background. And I think that's really helpful. You've been out in the field. You've been involved in politics for a long time. I didn't realize you were homeschooled, by the way. My wife and I looked at homeschooling. We've got 4 kids, but we seriously considered it. What type of, there are lots of different brands of Republicans out there, right? Michael is like your traditional true conservative, Ted Cruz type conservative. I'm more of your MAGA populist right conservative. Used to be more libertarianish, and then I grew up. But what type of conservative are you? Who do you like? Who do you read? Who inspires you? What's your intellectual history?
That's a great question, and that's also something that's kind of tough to nail down, I think, because there are elements of all those different brands that really resonate with me. So I would say if you were to put it in a nutshell, I love Rand Paul. I've always loved Rand Paul. I think he's a good way to kind of balance the different factions of the party. It is really tough to nail down, and it's not because my opinions have really changed on things. It's more just, I think, the definitions of all these different terms. We had the libertarian moment, I guess, so to speak, from 2014, 2015, kind of into 2016. And I think a lot of those issues resonated with me very strongly, and still do. But I also think some of the elements of the populist revolution that we've had, particularly here in the Mahoning Valley, have also resonated with me. I mean, I don't really think those things necessarily need to be at odds. I think it's kind of a matter of I think the messaging conservatism through the kind of the new wave of populism that has resonated so well with people locally really resonates with me as well, because, I'm not somebody that thinks that the government is the answer to all of our problems. In fact, I think the government has actually caused a lot of the problems, and, finding a way to educate people that the government's not necessarily your friend, and that the best intentions, you can have all these great ideas and all of that, but when you actually put them into practice, it doesn't work, because the nature of government is to be corrupt and inept and inefficient. I'll use the post office as an example. Something I get ripped on a lot from the local Democratic Party as well is because I have long-running beef with the post office that is, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it's also pretty serious in the sense that they're a quasi-government entity that also functions like a private business in the sense that there's no oversight, yet they pay no taxes on anything. They don't pay gas taxes. They don't pay tolls. They don't pay property taxes. They don't do any of that. They are a protected legal monopoly that is just generally, I think, produces a pretty poor product in terms of the way they deliver the mail. Yet they lose billions of dollars every year. All that money gets deferred to the Treasury, and then, they get loan forgiveness and extensions and interest waived, and essentially they just will come back into Congress like they did back in 2022. Oh, we're $100 billion in debt. please help us, wipe out some of this debt, forgive some of this debt, change the pension funding system, the pension funding formula, which has always been kind of crazy. But, I'm glad that they were able to come to some sort of resolution on that. But then basically 6 months later, the post office was back and saying, oops, we actually are 150 some billion dollars in debt. We're going to need another bailout. And, that's a good example of a government entity that everybody generally likes. If you look at the approval ratings for the Postal Service, it's the highest rated government entity in terms of public approval, but it's also really terrible at its job. And the issue is not with the people at the Boardman Post Office, which are incredibly pleasant. The issue is with the structure of that agency and the way that it kind of fails the people and fails the taxpayers and fails the customers and people of the country. So, kind of got off on a post office tangent there, but
no,
generally speaking, back to the ideological side of it. I kind of have I think a little bit of everything. I read a lot of history books growing up, so I think that's probably what started my interest in politics in general. But I would probably say if I were to nail myself to one, specific type of politician, which is really hard because I always tell people you shouldn't idolize politicians because they're generally never a good idea to think too highly of politicians because they're always going to have disappointed you somewhere, one way or another. But Rand Paul, I think is, he cares about a lot of the issues that I care about, and he comes at it from the angle that I usually come at it from. But I'm also, I don't want to say that I think pragmatic will probably get misinterpreted, but I'm willing to take progress if it's movement in the right direction, even if it's not something that I want entirely. It's we're never going to get everything that we want, but what I think the left has done a really good job at over the last really our entire lifetimes and longer, probably our parents' lifetimes, is taking those just kind of slowly chipping away at things and shifting the Overton window. That over the course of a generation, the conversation is completely different, and we're dealing with a totally different issue set because they accept that incremental progress. And I think we have the tendency a lot of times to, we don't get what we want, we put our foot down and we end up getting nothing. My philosophy is you hold out to try to get the most that you can possibly get. But at the end of the day, take what you can get now and then come back a couple years later and see if you can continue moving that conversation forward, because we can't just play this all or nothing brand of politics when the left has been chipping away at our liberties and our identity as a country for the past 50, 60 plus years. And we are where we are today, even looking at what the conversation was back in 2012 compared to the conversation we're having now. I mean, they're just worlds apart. The issues are totally different. The party's positions are totally different. And I think that's, we kind of have to start, tactically speaking, I think we have to start kind of playing that type of game. So there's definitely an element of pragmatism that I believe in terms of just moving the ball forward. If you can move it forward in any way, do it. Like I want to definitely, if there's something terrible that's getting thrown in there, I'm all for killing bad bills. I think that's just as important as passing good bills, but taking what we can get and kind of moving things in the right direction. Like, look at the spending conversation from 10 years ago to today. Nobody actually cares about fiscal responsibility or the national debt. It's a talking point for whatever party is not in power. And that's terrible. Like, that's not a good thing. I'm not happy about that, but I do think that's just kind of where we are and where the party is now, that nobody really cares about that. We talk about, you talk about sequestration. Was that? It was the Obama era. It was probably 10, 12 years ago too.
I remember that.
The conversation, you basically reduce the rate of spending increase by a fraction. So it's like, department whatever is only getting a 2% increase in the next fiscal year versus the 4.5% they wanted. People are literally dying. The narrative around it's so absurd. And that's because we've been losing the spending argument for 30, 40 years. I think even going back to Reagan, we haven't had a Republican president, honestly, that's had any type of positive impact on the national debt or the deficit since Calvin Coolidge. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just want to say, no, I absolutely agree. And I'm going to make one point before I turn it over to Michael. Is I think that the libertarian revolution and the populist revolution are actually allied, because I think what we've seen in our lifetimes is a massive increase in the size of scope of government. It continues to expand. The federal government, even the state government, they're spending more and more and more. They're not necessarily taxing more, but that difference is being made up for by inflation, because that spending has to come from somewhere. And moreover, what we've seen is the rise of this like massive bureaucracy, right? That is just invading every single aspect of American lives.
And the result has been a depowering or disempowering of local communities, of the states, of the people, essentially,
Mm-hmm.
because bureaucrats and bureaucracies and the administrative state has gradually, swallowed them up and expanded.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, the inflation that we're seeing today is the direct result of two things. One is I think the housing prices are up because we've let in 20 to 30 million people in a matter of 3 to 4 years, which you can't make houses overnight. So that's driven up
Mm-hmm.
housing, it's driven up food, it's driven up a lot of different things. And Democrats won't admit it. They just play dumb, like supply and demand doesn't exist. But the other thing that's happened is that, Biden got elected, he had full control of Congress, and he spent trillions of dollars. And we went from a $4 trillion federal government, which is incredible to think about, to a $6 to $7 trillion federal budget. And I would ask you, and with spending all this money, it's by necessity devalue the dollar because you're not making more goods and services. You just have more dollars chasing after them. And with all this spending, have people's lives gone better? Are people enjoying their standard of living, right? Are they affording more? Are they living better lives? Has the quality of our life gone up? Have the quality of our public services gotten better? Like, Pete Buttigieg, however you say his last name, he was in charge of the Department of Transportation. They had billions of dollars to build all this charging infrastructure. And they built like 6 charging stations or 7 charging stations.
$7 billion, 7 charging stations.
Yeah, exactly. So the Dems, and they have the same axiomatic response. Whenever there's a problem, they just spend more money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't work, the response is we just need to spend more. We spent 10, well, we should have spent 15. We spent 15, well, we should have bought 20. And then eventually, if you're like, hey, this doesn't work, they're like, hey, shut up, we're importing Haitians and your vote's not going to count. Like that's their end game, right? Which we'll get to. Anyways, Michael, I didn't mean to hog the mic here.
No, Dave,
I'll turn it over to you.
You were looking out for me with me suffering from COVID-19, the China virus. You're worried about my health, and you want to make sure my throat's well rested.
I do care about your health. Yeah.
I'm messing with you. So Tex, my question to you is, now Dane right here, my buddy Dane is buddies with Ron Verb, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this. Ron Verb
think so, yeah.
is a big champion of property tax reform. So we'll get into that, but let's put that aside for a second, and you could touch on that. What do you think are the 1 or 2 issues you really want to go to Columbus and champion for this district? And then to follow up on that, where does property tax reform come into play for you? Because for Ron Verb and a lot of those people, especially on fixed incomes who have been hit with these huge increases in their property taxes, while their Social Security, maybe they're living on Social Security, they're only getting 5 or 6% increase, but your property taxes go up 30-40%, and it could equate to many hundreds or maybe over $1,000 or more for some of these people on a fixed income. So what are those issues that you plan to champion once you actually have the opportunity, once the next session comes into play?
Yeah, so I think on my own personal level, I think the things that I want to champion are, what is the next era in the Valley's economy? So you look at historically, we've been a manufacturing region, and that's been our identity. That's who we are. My grandpa worked at UAW at the Lordstown plant, was a UAW member for about 30 years. That's who we are in the Mahoning Valley. When you think of us, you think of the steel industry and cars and building things and working with your hands. And I think that is part of who we are historically. We still have an element of that today. And I think a big part of our future is in that realm as well. But I also think that what we need to do is look beyond just that. I think people tend to gravitate towards those because that's what's familiar, that's what's safe. We take a lot of pride in our heritage and our history and on those issues, and how much we've contributed both to the state and to the nation historically with our manufacturing base. But manufacturing isn't what it used to be. You can make twice as many cars with the same number of employees, working fewer hours, and that's whether for better or for worse, that's just the way that things are. So manufacturing is always going to be a part of the future, but looking beyond that, not putting all of our eggs into one basket is really important. I think there's a lot of potential in two specific sectors for the Mahoning Valley. That is the technology, whether that's, additive manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, or data center, really anything in that realm. I think that is a super broad topic, and I think there's a ton of potential there. Particularly in the data center space, I think providing the fiber infrastructure to make that a reality is going to be something that I prioritize, because not only is that good for economic development on the broader scale, attracting things like data centers, but that's also going to be good just for people and businesses that are already here. I mean, who doesn't want to have better internet access, making sure people in the rural parts of our community and Trumbull, Columbiana, and Mahoning counties, because it's not just Boardman, Youngstown. We have a lot of rural territory as well. And making sure that those folks have access to high-speed internet so they can, be as tied in with the modern economy as possible. So much of our communication system is entirely online based. So just making sure that the rural areas in the Mahoning Valley are well served, in addition to kind of attracting that next wave of economic development that could potentially be a boon for us in the future. I know there's interest in data centers already. We're going to try to do everything we can to bring more of them here. We have a lot of property. We have a lot of space. We're in a great location. Property is so cheap. I mean, you can buy an entire building for the cost of 1 month's rent in San Francisco. And, I'm not the only person that's kind of figured that out. There are a lot of people in that space already that are scouting, not just Ohio, but specifically in the Mahoning Valley. So I think there's a ton of potential there, but the challenges that we face are kind of the infrastructure that help us get to that point, which leads me to my next point that I really want to focus on, which is energy. There is a huge energy crisis looming if we don't do anything 5-10 years down the road. The generation capacity that we have in the state now is barely enough for the projects that are going to be coming online in a year or two. So let's say if Intel actually comes online, Lord willing, the full extent of what we're hoping it is, that's pretty much all of our excess power generation capacity is going to be taken up by that one project. And so what does that mean for everybody else? That means we're going to have to import more power from those other PJM states, which means we're going to be reliant on other states and their regulatory regimes and their pricing schemes. And just, it's not going to be a good situation. Prices are going to go up for consumers, the people that already are struggling to afford their electric bills, because, my electric bill is, $200 a month, which is kind of ridiculous. I live in a 1,300 square foot house. Like, we're not doing anything crazy here. I'm not mining for Bitcoin or anything. It's just, air conditioning and TV and whatever. So those prices are already really expensive for people. Rates have gone up. Utility rates in general, both gas, electric, and pretty much everything. It's not moving in the right direction, especially with the inflation crisis and the cost of living being so high. A lot of people are getting hammered by that. And then we'll get into property taxes in a few minutes, but you throw the property tax thing in the mix, the prices at the gas pump in the grocery store, like it's really tough for working families, people in the lower middle class, people that are really struggling to get by. It's really tough for them now, even in a place like the Youngstown area, which is one of the most affordable places in the country to live. But when you tack on to that a looming energy crisis, you're going to cause a lot of problems. Everything that we want to do requires energy. So whether that's traditional manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, data centers, like literally everything, we can't grow if our energy supply is stagnant. I think part of the solution to that is the Public Utilities Commission has been a mess for a long time. The Power Siting Board, which is a subsidiary of the Public Utilities Commission, they're responsible for approving all of these projects, whether it's solar, wind, gas, coal, all of that all falls under the purview of the Public Utilities Commission and the Power Siting Board. So I think the biggest thing that we need to do is to try to remove as much of the red tape possible and get more of these power projects online, because there are companies that want to build power plants in Ohio and Northeast Ohio that they're just struggling to get through the red tape of the Power Siting Board. I was down in Columbus a few weeks ago, and I got the flow chart from the Power Siting Board of the process to get a project approved. And it's the most convoluted just mess of all these different steps. And it's just everything that the average person thinks about when they think of red tape and bureaucracy. That is basically what's running the energy sector in this state. You got obviously the corruption that was exposed from House Bill 6 kind of showed some fundamental flaws about that system and the lack of oversight there is, where the only real oversight the public has is that public utilities director that the governor appoints. So they're a political appointee, and a lot of times those go to people like the former PUCO chairman that was arrested and now passed away, Randazzo. Is it doesn't really attract the people with the best interests of the state at heart, and we kind of, we had that corrupt individual running things, and the pendulum has swung back, and now the governor has appointed somebody who essentially knows nothing about public utilities, and that was kind of a selling point for that appointment, was that this person doesn't really know anything about the space, so they can't get corrupted. I don't think that's a great way to do things, personally, but kind of having all of that power in this obscure, kind of muddled, bureaucratic mess of a public utilities commission, and whatever they say is pretty much what goes. They have all these different criteria. They have a lot of wiggle room and whether they like something or not. They've been granting themselves extensions on projects. You're supposed to have, I think, 275 days by law to approve or reject a project, and they have just been giving themselves extensions like, oh, we're going to give ourselves another 275 days, year after year after year, and all these projects get caught up in this web of bureaucracy. They ultimately go nowhere, and then now we're stuck at the point where the 10-year outlook for energy in the state of Ohio is not great. It's not because we don't have the resources or the ability to make it happen. It's because the bureaucracy has gotten in the way of making that happen. And now you have the public utilities sounding the alarm bell, and rightfully so. Now, their reason for sounding the alarm bell is something that I don't think is in the best interest of us, the people of the state, because they're looking for an excuse to, oh, we need another rider on people's utility bills so that we can fund building our own power plants. And they want to get into the generation space, which I'm not against them doing that. I'm against them doing that at, no risk to their shareholders, and them not really footing the bill for it and passing the bill off to us, the ratepayers, because I think a lot of things get passed on to the ratepayers in this state that are, just essentially a way for the utilities that operate more or less at a monopoly. I mean, nobody really likes to say that we're a competitive generation state, but we're not a competitive, distribution state. We're a public utilities. We have First Energy, Duke, and AEP, and that's pretty much it. They all kind of operate in their own little bubbles and don't really have to compete with anybody. And the open market is, below them. So they're kind of in a place where they're going to benefit greatly from this if the status quo remains, because there's going to have to be more generation that gets built. But do I think it's in the best interest of the people of the state for it to be First Energy and Duke and AEP building more power plants funded by us, the ratepayers, instead of them, their shareholders, taking on risk the way that any other business would to kind of get into that space? So that's probably the most consequential challenge I think we're going to try to face, that I need to try and figure out what's the best solution and work with the other people down there and figure out what we can do, because the status quo is just not working. It has been working for a long time, and it shouldn't take a crisis or the threat of a crisis for us to do the right thing there. But that also could position us to be in a really, really good place here because of the resources we have, because of the infrastructure we have, because of the manufacturing base we have, that if we could build more power plants in the area, that's going to be great for Eastern Ohio, because that's where the gas comes from. And that's the clearest, kind of the clearest solution to the energy problem that we're facing is natural gas, because it's abundant, it's reliable, it's cheap. Sorry, a lot of talking. It's cheap.
No, that's okay.
And, it's also clean. I mean, going back to the environmental points we made a few minutes ago, the single biggest driver for the reduction in carbon emissions in this country over the last 10 years has been fracking. And that's a crazy thing for a lot of people to wrap their brain around, but it's because of the natural gas industry. A lot of gas power plants have come online, and a lot of older, more inefficient gas and coal plants have gone offline, and you're able to produce more energy with a significantly lower carbon footprint. And that is all thanks to more or less the gas industry. So I think that's huge potential in that I think could be really good for the area.
So the energy generation and keeping the power, these are kind of like very technocratic or policy-driven areas that I think kind of escape the purview of the average voter, but are actually pretty crucial, right? Because as you say, we're hitting limits in our generation capacity. We have some aging facilities that are going offline. We're going to need not only to replace what we have, but to incrementally add more if all the new demand is going to come on to keep prices low and competitive. It's just an issue that I think a lot of people don't think about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's
Yeah, and
handled on the
people
state
aren't
level,
going
and
to think
it's
about
crucial.
it
Yeah,
until
sorry,
the
go ahead.
crisis is there. Then that's the problem too, is because, you know, everybody sees their bills are getting higher. It's inch by inch. But if you look at some of the, you know, this is getting real in the weeds, but if you look at the
Yeah.
pricing, the FERC auction rates for power generation capacity for next year, it's like a, you know, a tenfold increase year over year. So I mean, the crisis is mounting, and I just don't want it to get to a point where people's utility bills double overnight to where people are paying attention, kind of like what's happened with property taxes, where, you know, everybody was fine voting in levy after levy because, oh, it's only a little bit, and then all of a sudden, boom, our property values go up because of the inflationary market, and now everybody's paying the price. So, you know, I think the solution there is kind of how we implement those valuations, because the valuations have to, you know, you have to keep the market, you have to keep the valuations up to market prices. Like, nobody's denying that we needed to, you know, every 3 years properties get reevaluated, and the property values go up or down based on the market or based on, you know, a whole other host of factors that the auditor's office will take into account. But where people are feeling the pain is because it was a big jump year over year. So I think probably the easiest solution is just to phase in those increases, make it a rolling average. So, you know, if your property value goes like this, then that increase gets phased in over 3 years, and the next one, you know, can kind of steady and even things out, so people aren't just hit with an overnight huge tax hike that they didn't really expect or didn't really vote for. But a big part of that too is, like, a lot of levies have been passed, and you know, those levies stack up over years, and eventually, when you get a situation like this, you get a big hike overnight, and you can't really do anything about the levies, because the levies are usually once a levy's passed, it's very difficult to get it to ever fall off. So what the challenge we're faced with is, how do we get relief to people now, the people that are getting hurt, that have been hurt all year? And, you know, I've only been there since June, didn't really get to do a whole lot of anything, but I was disappointed just as a citizen and as a property tax payer that, you know, we just kind of sat on our hands, and, well, we'll get to it. Hopefully we can come up with something. We'll do a commission, and the commission has come back. There's a bipartisan study commission to kind of look at a bunch of different solutions of the property tax problem, and, you know, make policy recommendations that will probably realistically only get implemented in the next operating budget. When you're talking about billions of dollars, that type of spending and revenue change is typically only done in the operating budget. So I think anything major on that probably won't get done in lame duck. I'm hopeful that maybe we can do something that changes the way that those evaluations are implemented to kind of give people some short-term relief. But in terms of a longer-term solution to the property tax issue, unfortunately, I think we're going to be stuck waiting until the operating budget, which will be early next summer, that gets passed.
So
I think starting June 30th is when the new operating budget will kick in.
But so here's my problem with the Republicans in Ohio. Okay, and I'm going to ask you a somewhat pointed question on this. The Republicans in Ohio are supposedly fiscal conservatives, and they passed some real wins. Like, I don't want to be overly critical of them. The school choice bill was a big win. I know Michael's a huge fan of that. And you know, they've done some good things, but the spending levels have gone up dramatically over the last 10 years. And DeWine in particular spends money like it's going out of style. And the problem with, like, talking about property taxes is that you can twiddle with whatever the tax rate is or the formula. But the reality is, if you're spending on one side, that revenue has to come from somewhere. And whether that comes from property taxes or state taxes or corporate taxes or sales taxes, the money has to come from somewhere. And the only way to truly reduce the tax burden is to reduce the spending burden. And my critique of DeWine is, if you look at Ohio relative to other Midwestern states, and if you look at Ohio compared to where we are nationally, I think we've fallen further behind. I think that the big government approach of DeWine of giving, like, targeted tax breaks to major companies like Intel has come at a cost of Ohio competitiveness. Like, I think Indiana is doing much better than we are in terms of tax burdens, in terms of business creation, job creation. If you look at the South, like Tennessee, even Kentucky, I would argue, are doing better than we are. I'm trying to think of some good. I think we're probably doing better than Michigan. I think Michigan's a disaster, and Illinois. Nobody wants to live in Chicago if you can help it. But like we're kind of like middling. We're not the worst. We're not as dysfunctional as California or Illinois or New York, but we're not the best, right? And we could be the best. So my question to you is, do you feel that the Republican Party has done a good job with all the power the voters have given them? And where could they be better? Where have they fallen short?
Well, I mean, I think there's obviously huge room for improvement. Talking about property taxes, do I wish that we had done something on property taxes a year ago? Absolutely. I think your point on spending is spot on. The only way we're actually going to be able to meaningfully reduce the tax burden is people have to kind of come to grips with the state not spending $50-60 million a year. And unfortunately, a lot of that spending is on autopilot because of Medicaid. There's not really anything we can do about Medicaid spending. That's we get federal funds for that. We spend a lot of money on that. Governor Kasich accepted the Medicaid expansion from the ACA a long time ago and kind of put us on this track. That money, the influx of federal cash was going to end pretty much around the same time that he left office. So it wasn't his problem. He got to pat himself on the back and say, I'm a good person. I love helping people. Yay, I'm going to run for president. And now we're all stuck footing the bill. And there's not really a whole lot we can do with that. Unfortunately, because that is the biggest single expenditure we have. Medicaid and education are 1 and 2. But no, you're completely right. The spending is out of control. There's a lot of things the state doesn't need to fund. I use splash pads as an example. Everybody loves to have these great things in their community and their neighborhoods, and I'm all for those.
Are you talking splash pads where there's like the water and like the concrete pads?
The state spends a massive amount of money in the capital budget on projects like that.
Wait a minute. The splash pads, because there's a splash pad in Aurora, and there's another splash pad.
Dane loves it, I bet.
I do, but I didn't know that the state government. I just assumed that the splash, okay, wait. I'm gonna let you go. I just gotta. In my mind, a splash pad is the responsibility of the town. The people in the town, the Chamber of Commerce, the community organizations. Yes. And then they come together, they pave the pavement, they put the little pipes up, they put the fun little things, and they build the splash pad, right? You're telling me that the state government is building. Continue. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just want to make sure.
You should look at some of the things the state spends money on. It's crazy. So one thing that the state does is there's a wine tax, and I'm not positive the specifics of how this works, but if it's basically a tax on every barrel or bottle or whatever of wine that is funding this office that promotes Ohio's wine industry. So it's a tax on the industry to basically fund propaganda for an industry. And there's a whole long list of programs like that where there are all these special carve-outs and special handouts, but generally speaking, yes, the state funds a lot of those types of projects. The state doesn't build them. The state gives the local entity the money to do it. So I'll give a great example of how I think some of those projects should be done is the city of Struthers. The city of Struthers has a dog park that was funded entirely by private donations. I went to the opening with the mayor. The community came together and basically decided we need a dog park. The mayor was great in helping bring those people together. The council, everybody worked together on a local level and funded this project with private donations. No tax dollars involved, but most of the projects you see like that across the state are funded by the state government. A lot of money gets doled out, and it's the way that things are set up is you have the operating budget in the first year of your term, and if you're in the House, the capital budget in the second year of your term. Those dollars get doled out basically in the summer, and then you run around as a politician, all the ribbon cutting, saying, "Look at this money I brought back to our community for whatever it is, splash pad, any of those types of things."
Yeah,
it's kind of a way for politicians to fluff themselves up, right around election time and saying, "Look what I'm doing, this really nice thing that nobody can really be mad at." But that adds up to billions and billions of dollars. every year, every 2 years, every budget cycle on just pure fluff. And I'm all for capital improvement projects. I think there's a
Sure.
lot of things that need to be done on infrastructure and those types of community assets. I'm not against any of that sort of thing, but I also think the way the system is set up is it promotes a lot of wasteful spending on little types of projects that are feel-good projects that everybody objectively likes, that are good things. But I just don't really think the state needs to be the one footing the bill for that, because, if you want to build a new park at the local level, pass a levy. You have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And that's up to the members of your community to do it. But, those little things add up at the state level. You talk about the bureaucracy. I mean, there are tens and tens of thousands of people on the state payroll in Columbus and across the state that more or less they count paper clips for a living, and then they get, health insurance and a pension. And, you're talking the state health insurance that's thousands of dollars per person per month for a whole bunch of redundant bureaucratic jobs where nobody is really doing anything meaningful. That if you probably, if you reduce the state payroll by 20-30%, the average person is not going to know. Their life is going to go on exactly as it was before. We have these core responsibilities of public safety, infrastructure, and education. That's what we should be spending money on, and trying to create an environment where businesses can do what they need to do. Small businesses can grow and thrive and employ people and innovate without having to go to Columbus and hire a lobbyist to beg for a carve out. Because that's also, a lot of our tax code, there are a lot of carve outs. A lot of legislation carves out certain people and, applies to some groups and some companies and not to others. And I think that's kind of a bad way of doing business that just kind of needs to change. If we're ever going to meaningfully reduce spending and reduce the tax burden, we have to kind of attack those big issues and really laser focus in on what the state actually should be involved in funding.
So it's funny you said that 20 to 30% number, because actually, as you were talking, that number, I thought you could eliminate 20 to 30% of the federal government, and I could confidently say,
at least
that no, at least I'm being very conservative with that. Mm-hmm. No one would notice a difference in their lives. No one. It's like they panic. Oh, the government shut down. The government shut down. The government would shut down like nothing. And they would like obnoxiously take cones and like shut down the public parks. Yes. And that's the only difference that you would observe. And I'm confident that you could do the same thing to the state of Ohio. And in actuality, it would free up more investment in dollars for the things that we do want to spend money on. And it would allow us to grow, and that we can do other things. You said something too, and I have to mention this, and I'm going to be polite and not make you comment on this, but the Medicaid dollars, right? Mm-hmm. With the whole debate over the Haitian immigrants, the Chamber of Commerce, Michael Metzinger's, all his buddies, they love to say like we get these cheap workers, right? That they're willing to work, and they work for $15 an hour, isn't this great? But the costs are not borne by the private sector. The costs are borne by the public sector. Because those people are getting food stamps, those people are getting Medicaid, those people are getting housing assistance and heating assistance, et cetera. And all the benefits to having cheap labor accrue to the private capitalists, but all the costs are distributed amongst the public weal. And that's why, GDP keeps going up, but people are like, hey, my standard of living isn't getting better, right? Like things are getting worse, it seems like. But GDP is getting better. What's going on there? It's because a lot of the costs are being borne publicly while the profits accrue privately. That's just an aside. And again, I'm not going to make you comment on the Haitian things and the dogs and the cats. But they are eating the ducks.
Yeah.
I do believe they are absolutely eating the ducks in the public park. Like that is, I think that is unambiguous. Multiple people have reported that is real. Whether they're eating the cats and dogs, I don't know, but they're eating the ducks. I believe that.
Well, I'll kind of go not on that specific point, but I also think I agree with what you're saying. And, I'm not one to try to, kind of rip on the Chamber of Commerce or anything like that. I think they have a lot of great ideas and great policies on things like regulations and the business climate. And, that's a lot of really good people doing a lot of really good work there. But
I agree. I'm being a little bit facetious, and I think you picked up on that. But yeah, go ahead.
But I do agree with what you're saying there, where, what is the benefit to we the people to some of these things? Because, economic development is great, but we also want economic development that works for the citizens of our community. And I agree that a lot of the costs of bringing some of these people here are borne by the taxpayers, and honestly too, you kind of think of, whether for right or for wrong, we got to live in reality here. And if there's a new group of people dropped into a community that are getting all sorts of advantages that the native population that is in a lot of cases struggling, a town like Springfield has a lot of similarities to a place like Youngstown, similar population now, been in economic tough times for a long time, population decline. These people that are struggling, that have lived here for their entire lives and watched their community fall apart around them, and then to see, they're now having to compete with people getting $5,000 to $10,000 a month in government benefits between Medicaid and SNAP and housing stipends and all these things. Like, that is just an atmosphere that's ripe for resentment, and that's not what we want. That's not a good thing. That's not something that should be encouraged or even excused. But again, we have to be realistic, and if that's the sort of thing that's happening, then whether that's communicating better or in my opinion, just not giving away government benefits to non-citizens, I think that's something that we have to try to take into account too. And it's not, it's not all feel good. It's not all people that are opposed to this in their community are like evil, racist, nasty people, because they're not. But it's also not that everything is all, sunshine and rainbows because we're bringing refugees into a community. There are a lot of real consequences that need to be dealt with, and a lot of tough, decisions that have to be made on how to implement that, or even if that's right for that community. And I think, if you were to try and apply that situation here, I think in the Mahoning Valley, you'd have a lot of problems from the public, number one, but I think you'd also deal with a massive problem with our resources being overstretched. You think about here in Boardman, there's an EMS levy on the ballot because they're struggling to have enough ambulance service and ambulance coverage, and they have to go to the taxpayers. I can assure you they don't want to have to ask. They know that nobody wants to hear that, but the local services are stretched thin, and that's what they feel like they need to do to be successful, is to pass that levy. If you add 15 to 20,000 new people into a community, a lot of whom are essentially living off of the state and federal government, those local services are not going to be able to keep up with that demand. And you're going to have a lot of problems, which is, I think, the real problem happening in Springfield are things like that, more so than, the cats and the dogs, which I'm not going to get into. But that's the real challenge with those types of situations. And that's, something we have to be mindful of here, is because we're also a community that's ripe for, we are a community that's right for that sort of thing, because we are, we meet all the criteria of a place like Springfield, where we kind of have more jobs. They might not be great jobs, but we have more jobs than people willing to fill them. And, rather than focusing on the youth and promoting a culture of work and creating a strong work ethic in young people, which I think is also a huge problem. And I also don't want to sound like a cranky old man complaining about kids today, but there is a huge, I think, issue with work ethic of people of my generation and younger, that a lot of times they will, go through high school without having a job, go off to college, live on campus, live off a meal plan, put everything on the credit card of their student loan, and then graduate in a field with a degree in a field that is maybe not all that in demand. And then they're just kind of stuck fending for themselves for the first time in their adult lives as a 22, 23-year-old. And you get a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress, and people just are not equipped and prepared to deal with the real world. And I think that's also a big problem, is you have people graduating expecting to be making $80,000, $90,000 right out of college. And that's just not realistic. No matter really what your degree is, unless you go into the skilled trades, you're probably not sniffing that level of income for a couple of years, 5-10 years at best, if you're lucky and in a good field and you're good at it. But I think those are, that's more of a cultural issue, I think, than something that the government can do. I mean, I think there are things we can do to encourage that, but I think that is more of a cultural problem that we're going to have to address, because I don't want to, if the choice is have all these jobs go unfilled and have our town wither away, or, have a lot of 20, 30,000 refugees that don't speak our language kind of come in and transform the identity of a community, that's not really a great choice for anybody. So trying to find a way to balance that and make sure that we can meet the economic needs of the workforce without also having a situation like Springfield.
Yeah. And I'll turn over to Mike. I'll just make a comment. You know, I think when people are like, well, nobody wants to work at the I think you're absolutely right about the work ethic. The drugs in particular is really, it's hard to do. You can't do a manufacturing job if you're on drugs, right? And the drugs are prevalent. And so, I think the work ethic has changed. I think that's all real. At the same time, I would say that, you know, capitalists and employers have not shown a loyalty to local populations. And so local populations aren't showing a loyalty to them. And a lot of times, if people don't want to do a job, it's because the wage isn't high enough. If you simply raise wages and have lower profit, you will get workers. And, you know, the immigration issue is used as an alliance between big business and the left, right? Because the left wants future voters, big business wants cheap labor, and they don't want to pay more. If they paid more, if they paid $30 an hour, $35 an hour, people are going to be working at that manufacturing plant, right? And if you have a normal market, what they will do, businesses will do, will just bid up the price of labor, and then people can afford a house, and people can afford to have kids, and then people can afford it. If you continually bring in low wage labor, right, you're not solving any issue. You're taking, again, all those costs, you're socializing them. All that profit is going to the owner. But enough on the immigration issue. I think your answer is largely right. Michael, you got a question, I know. COVID,
well,
Mike.
Yeah, and I do want to follow up. I think there's some truth there with the work ethic. Another thing from my perspective, in a position who has to hire people from time to time, it's gotten a little better lately, but the number of people who call us or apply for a job, set up an interview, and don't even show up for the interview, it's mind-boggling. Like, this isn't something that I didn't really deal too much with hiring full-time staff in my last job. It was more on the intern side, but in my current position, just it's mind-boggling to me that people take the time to apply for a job. Right? They pick up the phone. They say here's a time that they're gonna come to an interview, and then they just don't show up. And in some cases, you call them out on it, and they're like, "Oh, we had a different day," and then they don't show up the next day. So it's things like that drive me nuts. But last political question for me is: you obviously have a race still now coming up in November again.
That's right, I do.
Democrat Laura Schaefer, and I say her last name correct? So. It looks like a Beloit councilwoman, and she's an administrator with the Mahoning County Public Library System. And I do see here, now this was as of April. I think this number's higher. She at one point had raised $26,000. I'm guessing it's higher now. That was as of an April report when I was researching this. So she has some money in her pocket. So what kind of strategy are you taking? Is she, a credible threat to perhaps take you down? Obviously, if we go back a few months to that special election with Michael Rowley, the Democrat did win, albeit by 15 votes or whatever it was in Mahoning
Very
County.
narrow margin, yeah.
Very narrow margin, but nonetheless, it gave your buddy Anderson a little bit of enthusiasm. Make those Democrats locally feel a little upbeat that no, they haven't lost everything here. So just what are your thoughts on this race? What is it going to take to beat her? And does the new district and how it's set up, is that more favorable for you or less favorable?
So the new district, the 59th, is very similar to what the 59th district has historically been. So very similar to the Ron Gervary, Don Manning district. It only kind of got convoluted in 2022 with all the different redistricting lawsuits, and then the federal court, had to intervene, and that's why we end up with this real wonky type of district that I have now. So the new 59th is pretty typical of what the in my lifetime the Southern Mahoning County House District has looked like. It's a pretty, I think, a solid Republican district. I mean, that even back into 2018 and 2016, the southern part of Mahoning County was turning red, and it's really become quite red because Boardman has become competitive. Canfield has stayed more or less the same, gotten a little bit redder, but also we've made a lot of gains in the rural southern parts of the county. I mean, we go from winning those 60-40 10 years ago to 80-20 in a lot of those rural townships. Struthers has also become a lot more competitive. The city of Camel is kind of becoming more competitive. So, I feel very good about the race. I don't have anything bad to say about my opponent. I've only met her once. She's definitely a competent person. I think her heart's in the right place. And, she's running her campaign, and that's, she can do whatever she wants. It's not going to impact anything that I do. My biggest challenge is getting my name out. So getting appointed in the middle of summer, basically 10 o'clock at night in the middle of the summer because of a special election that nobody showed up to vote in, doesn't really lend itself towards a good springboard for a campaign. So I've been kind of trying to play catch up. I've done a pretty good job raising money so far. Campaigns are very expensive these days. So, I'm not sure how much money she's raised since that last report, because we haven't had anything since April that has been required to file. Some candidates filed the midsummer report needlessly, but it's always nice to get a snapshot of what people are up to. So, my biggest challenge is getting my name out there, trying to talk to as many people as we can, knocking on doors, going to community events, shaking hands and telling people about myself and what I believe in and hearing about their concerns. That's really what it's all about. So, campaigns have been kind of my profession in a sense for a while. So I feel like I'm in a pretty good place there in terms of doing what we need to do and maximizing all the technology and different avenues to reach people, as I can. But it really is just getting myself out there and letting people know who I am and what my name is, and kind of letting it go from there. I do feel it's like I said earlier, it's a pretty reliably Republican district. I think President Trump won it by about 19 points in 2020.
Holy cow.
And the 2022, the DeWine number is kind of tough to judge just because that wasn't a competitive race. But, even some of the other down ballot Republicans are, it should be a Republican plus, 10 to 12 as a solid baseline of where it is.
Tex, I'm looking, I'm like leaning in the camera because I'm actually on her website. And I think you're a very polite, respectful, obviously extremely intelligent individual. And I saw a picture of her with the local Dems. Mm-hmm. And I'm just looking at the picture of the local Dems, and my goodness, how the mighty have fallen. I think Laura seems, she's a younger woman. Mm-hmm. She seems like a nice person. I'm not going to comment on her, but then you look around her at this picture of all the local Dems, and you've got such luminaries like Bob Hagan and Anthony Trafficante. And then who's the Mahoning County Commissioner, the woman, Rita Mengetti? No,
Carol Remedios Righetti.
Carol Remedios Righetti. And you just look at these people and you're like, oh my gosh, it's interesting. I would ask, and I want to be mindful of time, and you've given us a lot, and I do appreciate it. My final question for you is 20 years ago, Democratic Party dominated Mahoning County. Okay. Mm-hmm. Not only Mahoning County, but the entire valley, Trumbull, Ashtabula, Portage, everywhere. Okay. Now you look at that picture of the party and you're like, oh my gosh, right? They've fallen so far. And you look at somebody like Chris Anderson, and I'm sorry, Chris Anderson, I'd like him to come on the show. He won't come. He's afraid. He's totally afraid, right?
Good luck.
He will not come on this show. He can't handle it. They put out a bolo, be on the lookout for me to come to the Canfield Fair booth because I said I was coming by to troll them, and they're like, oh, if you see this guy. Anyways, the Democratic Party declined so dramatically over 20 years. Okay, and the Republican Party has filled the void. My final question for you is, why did the Democrats fall, and what can Republicans learn from the hubris of the Democrats? Why did they fall in the local area?
I think it's twofold, which is the beliefs and the culture in the Valley has remained, I think, relatively consistent throughout my lifetime. We're not really undergoing a lot of rapid social change or demographic change the way that some areas are. That's the population loss, I think, contributes to that, which is obviously, it's not something that any of us are happy about. I go on Facebook and I see all the pictures of what downtown Youngstown looked like in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, and knowing what it's looked like my life, it honestly makes me very sad that I've never gotten to see that, and maybe never will, but maybe we can see something like that 20 or 30 years from now, and that our kids can live in a Youngstown that is more like that than the one that we've grown up in. But really, that's what it's all about to me. But I think it's demographically, we have remained relatively static. And what the Democratic Party advocates for at the national level, because people say, you know, all politics is local, which is true, but also the ideological bent of the two-party system is driven at the national level. And that's primarily driven by presidents and the people at the highest levels of what those national political parties are advocating for. So, you know, when I first got involved in politics, it was status quo. Obama was going to win Mahoning County, you know, so it's really a matter of, you know, the Romney campaign. Do we get 32% or do we get 36%? Because we get 36%, we might be in a better place statewide because we peeled off 3% in Mahoning County. To where it is now, where, you know, Trump won in 2020, and I think Trump's going to win again in, you know, 33 days or how many ever days we have left. But the national message from the two parties has radically changed. And I think it is more driven by the Democratic Party changing than the Republican Party changing. But I think, you know, on our side, what I think Trump was the catalyst for was making people feel like that we care and that we're listening, and that, you know, everybody is mad to see GM shut down. Everybody's mad to see the steel mills closed down 30 years ago and to see your job shipped overseas. Like, I'm mad about that. You guys are probably mad about that. Everybody that's lived in Northeast Ohio is mad about that. But for the longest time, the answer was always somebody like Mitt Romney comes along and, you know, they give that real polished answer that talks about macroeconomics and things. And you might explain it in a way that makes sense and is logical, but a lot of people they don't care because they feel a certain way. And a lot of it is based on emotion. It's based on the pride of their community that they've seen ripped away and shipped off to a factory in Mexico or China, something that used to be built here that we took pride in. That, you know, if you use the Chevy Cruze as an example, you know, I travel around the country and yeah, like I've never owned a Chevy Cruze, but like I would drive around the country and say, oh, Chevy Cruze, that was probably built in Lordstown. And that was cool. That's something we take pride in. We don't have that anymore. And, you know, that's just one example. But you think about what made Trump different than somebody like Mitt Romney is Trump would listen and say, like, yeah, you're getting screwed. I realize you're getting screwed. And like, I care and I'm going to do something about it. I'm not here to explain it away to you and be like, well, it happened because of X, Y, and Z. It's like, you know, like, you're getting screwed and I care and I want to try to do something about it. You've been ignored. You've been used for votes for the past 30 or 40 years. And where has it gotten you? This party has failed you. It's failed you as an individual. It's failed your community. It's run your region into the ground. You have your politicians and elected leaders getting arrested on a weekly basis and just being an embarrassment to the entire state. You used to hear people talk about Youngstown. You would always hear like, oh, has the mayor been arrested, or, you know, a car bomb or whatever. You just have this awful reputation that decades of Democratic control did nothing to help anybody. All it was, it created this system, this patronage system where everybody that works at the county is somebody's cousin or, you know, a girlfriend or a friend or a brother or a niece. It's just all this very like incestuous hiring process of all these patronage jobs that comes with one party rule. And, you know, I think hopefully we're going to get a chance to get like a fresh voice in there in the county commissioner's office, the county treasurer's office, and all these, you know, we really have to make an impact at the county level, because the way that we've done business for the last 30 or 40 years just isn't working. It's not serving the public. It's just blatantly corrupt. And that's why everybody, you know, I always encourage you, vote Republican from the White House to the courthouse, because those local races really do matter. Yeah. So I see Gino in the comments here. So that's my shout out to you, Gino. Make sure you vote for Gino, and hopefully
he's a great guy.
Yeah. Love Gino.
I got to see him. I'm sorry, Tex.
No, go ahead.
You're 100% correct to give the shout out to Gino. I think he's a great guy, and all the local candidates. Sorry, keep going. But yeah, I'm just.
But no, I mean, the national party has changed, and the local party has run this area into the ground. And like every local elected Democrat is not a bad person. I'm not trying to say that at all. You know, they don't come at things with bad intents, but the track record of failure is that party's, and they have to own that. And at the very least, you know, things haven't been going great in the Valley for my lifetime. I think probably a lot of people would agree with that. So what do we have to lose to change it up? Give us a chance. And if we fail 20 years from now, the way that things work, you're going to have another political realignment, and Democrats will be back in charge. Yeah. But I'd much rather, I have a lot more faith in our ability to do things and do things right. and change things and shake things up to the betterment of the people of this community. But they got to give us a chance, and the voters have been giving us a chance, and I think they will continue to give us a chance. And I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I just think demographically and the trends that I'm seeing, that I think we're all seeing, 10 years from now, I think Mahoning County is going to look a lot more like Trumbull County, and Trumbull County might look a lot more like Columbiana politically, just because that's the way the demographics are shifting, and the way the population is kind of moving. That's kind of the way it looks like it's going to be for now. And I think that's a good thing. I have to say my entire life, all 28 years that I've been here, I can't really think of a whole lot. What have the Democrats done for us?
Tex, again, sorry. It angers me in the city of Youngstown. They took people's water money, right? Like, think about this. Little old ladies and families on a fixed income are paying these water bills, and these water bills in Youngstown are exorbitantly high relative to the rest of the state. They're paying the money into the water fund, and then the local Democrats, and they were all Democrats. These were not Republicans. People like, who's the guy that wears the goofy bow tie all the time? Mike Ray. And the city council of Youngstown were taking that money and giving it to politically connected property developers who then put it in their pocket, right? If you want to talk about fighting for the common man, how can you get up there? And Mike Ray's still in city council. If he had any decency, he would have stepped down for even being involved with that, right? And him and the rest of them. That's the Democratic Party. It's a record of failure. It's a record of underperformance. If you look at the Mahoning Valley relative to the rest of the state, the Mahoning Valley has languished, right? And I would add this: look at the tax rates of Mahoning County, and look at the income tax of Youngstown, and compare those tax rates to the rest of the state. And if you're a young person, why would you want to live there and send your kids to school there? What are you getting for all of those taxes? You're paying more, and it's one thing if you pay more in taxes and you get more in services, right? But it's another thing if you pay more in taxes and then you get absolutely nothing in services. Look at what they've done to the city, the school board for the city of Youngstown.
Yeah.
Look at the dysfunction on the Mahoning County level and all the waste being spent there, right? So I'm really, my whole thing is, I think people like you, I think you're a very intelligent person. I think you are the opposite of me. I'm a bomb thrower. I like the hot button issues, but you're so smart that you're doing the actual work that needs to be done. So people can have a first world standard of living, right? And the thinking ahead. And I appreciate that. And you're out on the field, you're doing the work. You're walking the walk. You're not talking the talk. But I think it's because of people like you, Nick Santucci and Owl and Mike Loishek and the rest of them that have really changed the image of the Republican Party. And I just want to say thank you, because I hope what you just said comes true. Like, I hope we have power, we reform things, and we make it better, because we can't do any worse. I mean, we really can't. We're not going to be taking old ladies, water money and redistributing it to politically connect people like that. We're not going to be doing that. I can tell you that. But anyways, I'm done. I'll get off my soapbox. I appreciate you for coming on. Michael, I didn't mean to cut you off. I know you got COVID, but
no. Like I said, you were looking out for me, Dave. But I just want to say to Tex, thank you so much for coming on. It's clear this is the first time I really had a chance to hear you speak in depth, and I'm very impressed with your level of knowledge of the issues, and it's clear to me that you're running for the right reasons, which I appreciate. And a lot of the things that you said that matter to you, like I'm somebody, like I have no desire to leave the Mahoning Valley. And so to find somebody like you, who's kind of like-minded like me, who wants to see this area succeed, it means a lot to me. And, you're talking about data centers and things like that. And I'm real quick, we see all this stuff going on, all this development in Columbus, and at one point in time, I just want to see some of that up our way. You know what I mean? You see Intel, you see these Google centers in Columbus, and that's great and wonderful. And like all I hear about is Columbus, and that's great for those people. But look at the rest of the state, and hopefully, you and the state Republicans can do a better job than they have done, I would say, in terms of spreading some of that development across the state, because I think it would be beneficial for many. But needless to say, thank you again for all those things. But I want to end real quick with just some rapid fire questions. One or two words, and just to kind of get for people to understand you a little bit better. So, favorite non-chain restaurant in the Mahoning Valley?
Favorite non-chain restaurant in the Mahoning Valley? Honestly, it's probably a kebab house.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
Where's Kebab House?
It's on 224 across from the
Camelot
new Chick-fil-A in Boardman.
Correct. Yeah, right over there.
Boardman has a Chick-fil-A?
Yeah.
They have three
in Boardman now. One in the mall.
Well, that one just closed.
Oh, did it? It shows you how often I go to the mall. So, yeah, there's the one on 224, and then there's the other one on 224 by 680 closer to Poland.
Okay. It's been a while. Okay, keep going, Michael. Sorry.
All right. Let's see here. Favorite, I don't know. Did you play video games? Favorite video game, if you ever played it?
I actually didn't get to play a ton of video games growing up, but as an adult, I do have a soft spot for Red Dead Redemption, that type of game. Grand Theft Auto. What can I say? It's always a lot of fun.
Favorite book?
Favorite book? Gosh, I think my favorite fiction books growing up have always been Tolkien's work. I've read literally every single one of those multiple times, and I've kind of gone on a kick where I'm getting back and kind of rereading those. So I'll just kind of leave that broadly at Tolkien's work.
I think that's fair. Yeah, you could do that as
that's fair. Real quick aside, I was watching today because I have to work from home, COVID and everything. I had Mark Halperin, and he played the clip with Trump in the Bible verse. I'm sure you see that. He had to play it for this person. He's like, I don't know if you ever seen this, but this is about Trump's favorite book or whatever. And just his response. Anyways, I'm sorry to get off course. Favorite
is
movie.
It 2 Corinthians?
he didn't have it. He said it's that's a deeply personal thing, and I choose not to answer. And it sort of just made it seem like he didn't have one. And then at the end, they're like, "Were you a New Testament guy or an Old Testament guy?" He's like, I'm a little bit of both. You have to Google it. It's great.
Yeah.
Favorite movie.
Favorite movie. Probably Inception. I watched that movie the first time back when it came out in like 2011, and I've always just loved that movie. Anything Christopher Nolan, I tend to be a big fanboy of.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Okay. How about what about favorite president not named Donald Trump?
Favorite president not named Donald Trump, Calvin Coolidge.
Oh, that's it's a great answer. Okay.
Calvin Coolidge. All right, and I think that's my last one. If you look your favorite place to get away for a trip or a vacation or something like
that. Somewhere with a golf course. Somewhere with a golf course where it's not super like scorching hot.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm gonna play this real quick and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
I just gotta play this because I think this is quite entertaining.
I'll bet I'm gonna love this.
Let's see if I get the audio to work. 1 second.
I'm wondering what one or two of in the Bible, you've been talking about how it's your favorite book, and you said, I think last night in Iowa, some people are surprised that you say that. I'm wondering what one or two of your most favorite Bible verses are and why.
I wouldn't want to get into it because to me that's very personal. When I talk about the Bible, it's very personal, so I don't want to get into verses. I don't want to get into.
There's no verse that means a lot to you that you think about or cite.
The Bible means a lot to me, but I don't want to get into specifics.
Even to cite a verse that you like?
No, I don't want to do that.
You're an Old Testament guy or a New Testament?
Probably equal. I think it's just an incredible. The whole Bible is an incredible. I joke very much so. They always hold up the Art of the Deal. I say my second favorite book of all time. But I just think the Bible is just something very special.
Have you ever read the Quran? Do you have a view of that as a book?
I have not read it.
What's your view of that as a piece of important world history?
Well, it's certainly a piece of world history, and lots of things are happening, but it's not something that I have a lot of interest in. I would like to find out what's happening, why there's hatred, why there's, you look at what's going on in the world. And it's wonderful to say, hey, let's not look at Sweden, and let's not look at Norway, and let's not look at different places. But you look at what's happening with the Quran, it's a pretty scary thing.
Yeah, as soon as you asked me that question, my mind instantly went to I should just say the Bible and the art of the deal, because that's exactly where my mind went, and then I gave you a serious answer. But yeah.
So again, thank you so much for being on. Encourage everybody, especially if you live in the the 59th district, to
59th,
support you in November. And encourage everybody, if you tuned in tonight, please tell your family, your friends, anybody who lives in the district to tune in. We'll have the podcast up at some point, probably tomorrow evening, but the video, the YouTube stream will be up immediately after this podcast wraps up. So again, thank you so much, Tex. Thank you so much, Dane. I will say this, we're working in the background right now with another state rep candidate up in Trumbull County, David Thomas, who I know is somebody who's championed a lot with the property tax reform and all of that. When I've listened to Ron Verb. So we're working on that. Hopefully here in a couple weeks we'll have him on, and we'll maybe have an episode between now and then, Dane, to really kind of talk about things with the presidential race, because there's a lot happening. So again, thanks everybody for tuning in tonight, and take care.
Thank you, Tex. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
I think you're going to be you are going to be a great representative. I mean that sincerely.